Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We are just getting started. We're just letting people in from the waiting room. So we'll give you a second to settle in. Welcome, welcome. Welcome, everyone. If you're just joining us, we're just letting people in from the waiting room and they're getting settled in now. As you're getting settled in, feel free to use the chat box and introduce yourself. You can tell us in the chat where you're calling in from and what brings you to the Film Fest. What is your interest in today's event? Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. If you haven't yet, feel free to use the chat box and introduce yourself, say where you're calling in from. We are going to get started. So my name is Greta Zaro, and I'm the organizing director with World Beyond War. And World Beyond War is a global nonviolent network to abolish the institution of war. I'm excited to welcome you to Day 2 of World Beyond War's 3rd annual virtual film festival. Before we get started, a few Zoom logistics. So today's event will run for about 1 hour and 30 minutes. We are recording today's event, so if you have to leave at any time, no worries, we will send out the recording afterwards. Please do use the chat box throughout the event to post your comments, feedback, and questions. And if you haven't yet, again, feel free to use the chat box. I'm seeing some responses coming in now, and you can introduce yourself there. We do have captions available for today's event. You can click on the CC Live Transcript button to enable the Zoom captions if you'd like. If you don't see that button, sometimes you have to click on the 3 dots and then click More, and then you can see the captions. And a reminder that the captions are done by robots, so please excuse any errors with the transcription. This year's virtual film festival theme is celebrating stories of nonviolence. We want to thank Pace e Bene Campaign Nonviolence for endorsing and helping to promote this year's festival. And today, Day 2 is about the film Pray the Devil Back to Hell, which is a documentary chronicling the remarkable story of the Liberian women who came together to end a bloody civil war and to bring peace to their shattered country. Armed only with white t-shirts and the courage of their convictions, they demanded a resolution to the country's civil war. And we want to thank the team at Rocco Films for working with us to make the film available. Now, first, before we get started, we're going to launch a poll to ask you if you've watched the film yet. The film has been available for the past week, so we hope you've had a chance to watch it. If you haven't, it will be available until the end of the day today, so you can also watch it after this panel discussion. So I'm going to launch the poll right now. And you should see that on your screen. If you're a panelist, please don't vote on the poll. We're just going to have the audience members vote. And you can tell us whether you've already watched it or whether you're planning to watch it after the panel. And I see votes are coming in now. We'll give you a second more to vote. All right, I think I'm going to end the poll, but it looks like the vast majority of people, actually 100% on the poll, have already watched the film, so that's great. Okay, and with that, I want to introduce our 2 incredible panelists for today's discussion. We have Vaiba Flomo, who is a peace and women and girls' rights activist, peace builder, community organizer, feminist, and trauma case worker. As a part of the Women in Peacebuilding initiatives, she was instrumental in bringing an end to Liberia's 14-year-long civil war through advocacy, protests, and political organizing. She served as the executive director of the Community Women Peace Initiative in Liberia for 5 years. She also worked with the Lutheran Church in Liberia for 17 years with a focus on trauma healing and reconciliation, where she assisted ex-combatant youth to re-enter society. Currently, she serves as the Chief Operating Officer for the Foundation for Women Liberia. We're so excited to have you here, Vaiba. And our second panelist is Abigail E. Disney, who is an Emmy-winning documentary filmmaker and activist. She is the producer of Pray the Devil Back to Hell. Her latest film, The American Dream and Other Fairy Tales, co-directed with Kathleen Hughes, made its world premiere at the 2022 Sundance Film Festival. She advocates for real changes to the ways capitalism operates in today's world. As a philanthropist, she has worked with organizations supporting peace building, gender justice, and systemic cultural change. She is chair and co-founder of Level Forward and founder of Peace is Loud and the Daphne Foundation. Welcome, Abigail, as well.
Nice to see you.
And now I would like to introduce my colleague, Rachel Small, who is World Beyond War's Canada organizer, and Rachel will be moderating today's discussion, so take it away.
Thank you so much, Greta. And of course, thank you so much to Vaiba and Abigail for taking the time to be with us today and for your role in such a powerful film. I'm thrilled to see that everyone, at least everyone who answered the poll, has already watched the film, so I won't take any time summarizing it or going back over it, and instead we'll just dedicate all of our time here today to an engaging discussion with our two distinguished guests. I'm going to start off with a few questions to get us started, but I would encourage you to put any questions that you have for either of them or both of them in the chat at any time. And I will note them, and I will begin asking audience questions after I get us started with a couple questions of my own. So please, again, at any time, type your questions in the chat and we'll get to them in due time. But first, I was hoping to start off with you, Vaiba. If you could let us know a little bit about your work during the time period covered by this film. You have a very intriguing bio. I think many of us are really interested to hear more about what your work looked like during the time period of the film, as well as how it has continued since then. But you're still muted at this point, so you might need to unmute to be able to answer. I wonder if she's having some tech issues. We were just speaking 5 minutes ago, but of course that's how these things go. So maybe we'll give Vaiba a few minutes to rejoin us, and maybe instead I will start with you, Abigail, if that's okay.
Sure.
So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about, maybe just for starters, how. Oh, Vaiba, are you here?
Oh yeah,
I'm
Vaiba.
here. Please go. Yeah. Yes.
Great. Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
I'm so glad you were able to rejoin us. I was asking you to hopefully share a little bit with us about your work during the time period covered by the film, as well as afterwards, what type of work you do and what that looks like.
Okay, so again, thank you for the invitation to join you. For me, this is a very great opportunity that I know a lot of people have done peace building work. In every part of Liberia, we had different women's group, but to be framed and then to be showing up to the outside world, I think it brought us to this point. So I don't want to overlook that. If I should be on this panel, it's because Abby and her team have documented our work. So today we have become superhero in terms of peace building. So I'm grateful. And then my work before the documentary. That's why I have never forgotten the community, because I come from community. I was with the Lutheran Church Trauma Healing Program, focused on women associated with the fighting forces, ex-combatants, women that suffer multiple trauma, women that just through the war, they couldn't just come back to their normal. So we were like going from village to village. Sometimes we walk 7 hours. So just to reach these women to listen to their story, just to collect their story. And then until telling the story, we saw in the story was power. We saw in the story, these women needed to recognize their power, because each time they said their story, it was like at the end, some question was like, but I should have done this instead of me becoming victim. So the story now make them to know that they have power to prevent why they became victim of. So that point became our connecting point. That piece in the story. So we took that piece and then we started to work. So we could take one village, so just try into another village. So I continued to do that kind of work, sitting with women, documenting their story until we came to the point to say, look, this is us. We need to stand up. We just need to take this for ourselves. And I like the line that says the women arm themselves with white t-shirt. And then we took the white t-shirt. But we have done a lot of work. We have gone to church. We have gone to mass. We have gone to the traditional people. So after the frame, but that my work was just in the community. It was just some part, not even everywhere in Liberia, even though I have worked in 14 of the 15 counties in this country. But I wasn't known until the documentary. After the documentary, I now take my work outside of Liberia. And I went to South Sudan. I went to America. I became one of the women peacemaker. And all this, the documentary has taken my work outside my comfort zone. Even the documentary made me to know my own power. Sometimes when we watch a documentary, it's like, did I really do this? Did I really say this? You mean we were brave to go to these guys? So the documentary, again, just gave me more power. It just gave me more energy, more strategy. What I didn't do correctly from the documentary, I was able. And the international recognition. So, but the only thing I can never forget about is my work continue with the community women at all levels. So I continue my work with community women, making sure that they identify their own problem and they also identify their own solution. So my work stay at the community level with the women, but mind you, I'm also that cold water politician, or mind you, don't drink it over plus, then of course you will get sick. But I'm a politician also. I'll stop there for now.
Well, maybe I'll just follow up because this is very interesting. So, it sounds like so much of your work was about hearing other people's stories. It sounds like in a way, this documentary was a chance for your story also to be heard and to be held. I think that when we think about the impact of documentaries, often we think about the impact on the people watching it. I don't know if we as much think about the impact on the people in it. So that's all it's so important to share with us. Thank you. I had a little bit of a follow-up question about your work. I was so interested to hear that you've assisted ex-combatant youth to re-enter society. I can imagine that would be very difficult work in Liberia after so much violence for so long. I wonder if you can share a little bit about that work and that experience.
So here what happened during our DDR. It's DDR, the disarmament, demobilization, reintegration, no, not reintegration, rehabilitation, reintegration. But the focus from the UN was placed on those that had the guns. So those that had the gun have more focus doing the disarmament. But my work, because I knew after the disarmament, the demobilization, the rehabilitation, the reintegration is about the community. The community that receives so much harm from these fighters, they're going back to the community. Are the communities prepared to receive the very people that caused them to leave their homes, that burn their homes? They're going back to restart their life. So how do we do it? How do we work with the community that reintegration will be more easier? So again, I went back to the community. Yes, sometimes I went to cantonment sites to just encourage, like some of them that have maybe lost their legs, their arm, some regretted why this happened to me. Yes, but my focus was really with the community people and also those women that were associated with the fighting forces. They were not also really, and you know, the package for them were not as much as those that fought. So we also included them in my work, that they had children by these fighters, but the children they had by the fighters, they were not also considered in a DDRR program. So how do we work with these kind of people? You got two children by one fighter that you know you do not know his whereabouts, but you got these children, and there is no program to help you. Even you were underage, the girl was underage because she was self-slave. Now she's going back, her mom, her parents are all gone. So who's going to help her? So again, the Lutheran Church Trauma Healing Program, we took on that initiative. We started giving them some little money to restart up. It was like micro credit, but even in the end, we have to turn it to grants because they couldn't pay back. So that's how I took part in a DDRR. Mine was the reintegration, but at the community level. And those guys that associated themselves with the fighting forces and they are sharing the court during the fighting time. Over.
Thank you so much, and for reminding us to expand our vision past just what we might picture when we think of combatant, the person holding the gun, but these people are part of families, are part of communities. How do we expand that elsewhere? Thank you so much for that. Abigail, I'd love to turn to you and tell us a little bit about how you ended up being involved with this film, producing it, and maybe some that you can share with us about the process of making it. I see already there are questions in the chat sort of wondering when you started filming the militarized young people and how that all went.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and thank you to Vaiba, whom I haven't spoken to in years, and I'm just so happy to hear the sound of her voice. And wow, she has me thinking about a lot of things. My country's changed so much since Vaiba and I met in 2006 for the first time, and I'm listening to Vaiba talk about things like reintegration and reconciliation very differently now, because it's not such an abstraction to me. Since I'm living in such a tinderbox of a country. So in 2000, most of what the film is about happened in 2003. I went to Liberia for the first time in 2006. So everything had already happened. And while I was there for totally other reasons, people mentioned this story in conversation to me. And I kept thinking, well, if that happened, why wasn't it in the newspaper? That seems pretty important, you know? And so I went home sort of angry and frustrated on behalf of the women who'd done this, and feeling like there was something terribly wrong with a culture that doesn't find this to be important or relevant enough to talk about in the newspaper. And so I decided to make a film about it. I reconnected with an old friend. Please leave the door open. Please leave the door open. I'm sorry, I'm in a hotel and it's chaos here. So I'm trying to hold down the fort. So anyway, so I got started on the film. I re-met an old friend who was a filmmaker, wonderful person, and we just got started. What you see of war in that film and of the child soldiers is archival footage. So always, when there's a war anywhere in the world, The planes leaving the country are full of people who are fleeing because their lives are being destroyed by this war. And then they're half full of people going toward the conflict who want to report about it. And many of them go with high value systems and the intention to bring awareness to the war. But there's also this dynamic that they fit into in journalism about this kind of bloodthirstiness and hunger for the conflict that I think feeds more conflict. So there's always a ton of archival footage for you to work with. And that was sort of how we structured the film. We met Lema early in our process, Lema Bowie, who then introduced us to Vaiba and Natsatu. She was sort of our guide. And we pieced together the story from the interviews we did with them, which constituted kind of the backbone or the spine of the film. And then we hung picture around that backbone. Some of it was picture we shot ourselves. We went back and had the women gather again on the field, and we shot that. And some of it was archival footage that we found, which was not easy to find. Some of it, the footage of the women tended to come from private sources because the professional journalists didn't think of them as important enough to film. And then the footage of the fighting and the guns and the boys, there was no shortage of that. We actually used every single shot in the archival footage that included a woman. So that'll give you a sense of how hard it is to construct a story of women in conflict, given the way we understand how conflict unfolds and works. So now I've forgotten the rest of your question. But that was basically how we did it. The film came out in 2008 at the Tribeca Film Festival, and then had a really nice run, and then aired on PBS as part of a series called Women, War, and Peace. So we made 4 additional films. It was a 5-part series that aired in 2011. We had 13 million viewers on the series, which we were very proud of. That's a really hard number to get at PBS then, and even more now. And it continues to have this incredible life in universities and colleges. 16 years hence, I still meet people. I met a guy on an airplane just 6 months ago who said, "Oh my God, you made Pray the Devil Back to Hell." So it really has this incredible life. And I have to say, documentaries rarely have that timeless quality. But this one really does. It really speaks to people across cultures. It's shown on every continent in over 90 countries around the world. And because it speaks to what women do in conflict, it has a way of speaking a sort of universal language, because what women do in one culture, they do in almost every culture. And so they see themselves, women in Cambodia and women in Nepal and women in Bosnia, they see themselves in this film every time.
Incredible, like you said, for a documentary film to have that kind of impact across geography, across time. I mean, having watched it, I'm not surprised, but that's very special. Sort of on the flip side, someone was asking if Shani was asking if there was any backlash either to your filming or I think to the film in general.
That's the question probably Vaiba can answer better than I can. I will say that, this was my first film that I ever made. And so films do affect their participants deeply. I mean, for one thing, I think it's hard to be frozen in time in that way. You continue to live your life, you go on, you change, other things happen. And yet people will remember you for this moment, this little slice of your life. And that can be a great thing, and it can be a terribly limiting thing. I do think that there was division among the women after the film came out. There were women who felt they didn't get enough credit. There were women who felt other people got too much credit. And I since I've been making films ever since then, what I've learned is that happens basically 1,000% of the time. I feel badly that I didn't do more to kind of anticipate that and head that off at the pass. But it is kind of just comes with the territory. Vaiba, how about you? Do you think there was backlash to the film?
I think what happened to us as Liberian women, we have done a lot of work. It wasn't documented. So this group of people, and our work had different kind of sector. We came from the community. We have women in politics. They also working to bring peace, to bring end to the war. But they didn't have the opportunity we had with you documenting our own work. So when that documentary came out, it was like huge in the world, not even in the country.
Yeah.
So it was like, why this group, right? So it wasn't really, I think let's just look at it from our angle. I think that's where the whole thing came about. What about this group with all the work we did with our politicians? We won with them. But this group with the white hater sitting on the floor, where? So I think if I should be answering that question was you documented our own story and you didn't keep it to yourself, you send it to the entire world to see it. I think that's where we came from. Thank you.
I wish I had known, you know, I mean, the demands of storytelling are different from the demands of making sure everyone is heard, you know. And so when you're in an edit room, what you're doing is you're trying to construct the best possible narrative, which isn't always necessarily the whole truth, right? Because the whole truth is that thousands of women did this, and that's an impossible story to tell. So we tried to tell a story that credited more than one person and it tried to give a sense of the collective nature of this movement, which was really important to us because women's movements are collective. In fact, effective social movements are always collective. But especially in the American imagination, there's this need to have a hero at the center of the story and cast one particular person or one group of people as the heroes. And that's, you know, that's an easy way to tell a story, but it's not the way the world works. But we think it's the way the world works because that's how history comes to us, all packaged up in a neat little story with like one Martin Luther King and one Mahatma Gandhi at the front of the movement. And so, you know, we were trying to kind of turn that on its head by using a collective narration of 5 different women. But even in doing that, we couldn't do justice to just how collective and how enormous this movement was.
I think that's such an important point, and I want to come back to that after. But first, sort of being aware that many people in this audience might know very little about Liberia during the time of the war and probably since. So I was hoping, since this film does sort of end with the election of Ellen Johnson Sirleaf in 2006, I was hoping, Vaiba, that you might be able to sort of bring us up to date a little bit on how the political situation in Liberia has evolved since then. I know that's a very big question, sort of tell us about the last 20 years of history, but at least to sort of help paint the picture of what the legacy has been of the women's peace movement depicted in this film, and just a little bit about sort of how the aftermath of the conflict shown in this film has played out. And I know you're in Monrovia, the capital of Liberia right now, and I know you said that there's sometimes some internet issues, but if it is possible to turn on your camera just for a few minutes so we can see you a little bit, let's try that. And if it doesn't work, we'll of course turn it back off.
Okay.
There she is. Yay.
Hi, Abby. Actually, after the documentary, I tell you something. The Liberian women are no longer at the back. The Liberian women are no longer on the side. Yes, we agree we have a lot of challenges, but I think we play a leading role in the country. We don't just sit again. No longer we sit and just see things that we hammock our country with us, without the Liberian women talking. And the Liberian women talking is not just coming from one group of the Liberian women. We got the young women, we got the middle-aged women, we got the elderly women, even we got the women at the community level. those days, it wasn't their business. They felt I'm in my community. Nobody hammering me, so I don't think I should have anything to say. But after the peace movement, women now know that if anything goes bad, they will feel it more. Women now know that when things go right, they will enjoy. Even study in Liberia shows that women are we more engaging, and we are the breadwinners for our family. So imagine the breadwinner for your family, and you sit there, you didn't do anything when you needed to do something. When things get wrong, you are the one that going to suffer it. And we're not again no more afraid. I tell you, some by-election took place. A very young woman, I wouldn't want to call her name, a very young woman was like contesting. And the guy that she was contesting against have threatening her life, even including the president that said, that lady, I'm going to grab her and whip her. Thinking when he has said that it could scare her away to withdraw from the race. But she stood tall. It's because we have stood up and say no longer we can be at the back. So the Liberian women are talking, the Liberian women we participating, the Liberian women, and we getting there. Even though the number low, but we getting there. The peace work with it, it took us on the map, a place need to work more harder, especially the women. When we work together as women, then of course I think we can get there. But politics is not an easy thing. The division in politics, I think that's where we are. But in terms of the Liberian women, we are seated and we are recognized by everybody. If we are recognized by the government, the way we did is recognized by the government.
Wow, that's so powerful, and to have the movie end on such a sort of high point, and to hear that didn't all sort of dissolve a few months, a year, 2 years later, that there has been such a lasting impact. And
sorry, producing 2 Nobel laureates, that is a huge plus. It's because of the peace work to produce 2 Nobel laureates from one country. So we are placed on the top.
Yeah.
Was there something you wanted to add on that, Abigail?
Oh, I'm just nodding my head because, we can't forget that the Nobel Prize in 2011 went to Lema and Ellen Sirleaf, and that was enormous. I could see in people's eyes what it meant to be placed on the world stage in that way. And I think they've done the country really proud since then.
Another question I had for you, Abigail, had to do with, in watching this film, it was obvious to me that there were some very deliberate choices that were made. I'm sure there were many, but one that jumped out to me right away was, it was clear that you were very careful about how you depicted, and I would say also didn't depict, a lot of the really horrific acts of violence that characterized this war, that characterized so many years of violence in Liberia. I'm curious if you can speak a little bit more to that. And I'll say, for me personally, as someone who works at a war abolition organization, we're always trying to figure out, how do we share with people the violence that's happening in the world so they know the truth and so we can act, but at the same time, how do we do it respectfully for the people who've suffered violence, respectfully for our audience? It's a tough question. As a filmmaker, you obviously dealt with it in this film, and I'm curious to hear about it.
It was the question, and it will always be the question, right? Because on the one hand, when you're trying to make a case to people about how serious the thing war is, and when you're making that case in the United States, you actually really have to make the case to Americans that war's bad, actually. There is such a fantasy of war in this country, and you so obviously you want to start with the depravity and the numbers and the enormity and the violence and all of that, and that actually is the opposite of helpful, because first of all, it's not going to make your case. People just shut down. They can't and this is normal human reaction. It can't accommodate so much of the truth of the matter. But it also, we made the decision in terms of archival footage and dead people that everybody was once somebody's baby, no matter what they did or didn't do in the war. And if you don't want your baby depicted that way, then we're not going to do it in the film. That was kind of our guiding principle. So there's not that much actual blood in the film, in spite of the fact that we know there was, a lot of blood. We didn't want to depict the women as sitting by the side of the road with flies in their eyes, desperate, because that's not, we knew that they had those moments, but that's never the sum total of a person's life. That's never who they are. And given what women did to end that conflict, it was the opposite of helpful to depict them that way. So when we sat the ladies down for their interviews, we would get the makeup person and hair, and we shot it as pretty as we could, and we wanted them to be elevated by the film because we wanted it to be elevated in people's imaginations. So we and then Vaiba is the person who gives us the story that really moves us in the film in a way that is, I think it's one of the most powerful moments in the film, because she tells a story of one rape, and that stands for all the rape. I mean, if you can find a way to tell the story of what happens to a single person well enough, powerfully enough, and Vaiba in that moment expresses it so beautifully that when we were shooting that interview, I was undone. I was undone by her story. And Ginny, the director, is a more experienced filmmaker, knew that when somebody tells a story like that, you sit quiet, you let the camera roll on a person's face, because like the longer you sit in the silence after a story like that, the more powerful it is. And I, being the inexperienced person who was totally undone, kind of yelled from behind the camera, "Would you like a glass of water?" Like this was, I couldn't help myself. I thought Ginny was going to kill me because what she understood about film that I didn't at the time. But I'm so grateful to Vaiba for telling that one story, because in that moment you get and you understand the stakes. So your first impulse is always to slather people with numbers of blood, but actually the higher impulse is to take one story and to place it in the context of one human being's right to dignity and security in life, and depict the violation against that one thing. And if you do it right, it can stand for all of the things.
I think that is really interesting. What is all of our first impulse versus what actually connects with other humans, what actually is a dignified way to share stories.
I think a lot of things are our first impulse that we learn not to do, one of which is war. I mean, like, that's a very important thing to know, right? Because one of the arguments for, oh, we're just going to fight because that's natural to human nature. I mean, how many times have we heard that ridiculous assertion? And it's first of all not true, and the biology and the neurology and the paleontology and the archaeology all indicate the opposite of that. But on top of it, even if it is a natural instinct, you learn. That's the point of being a civilized human being grown up in society, is you learn not to do your first impulse, but to think and to act toward a higher purpose and a higher ambition. So there's a lot to be learned in life about resisting your first impulse.
Absolutely, and a lot of some of the work that we do at World Beyond War is about unpacking these myths about war and about human nature that people have been told over and over again, and are not based in fact, in history, in science, and anthropology, like you said. So it needs to be said over and over again. So there's a bunch of really interesting questions that the audience is asking. They sort of divide into two categories: more sort of questions about what does the aftermath of war look like, and also some questions about both of your backgrounds. So maybe I'll start with the broader political questions, and then go back to you two personally. So folks are wondering, First of all, were any of the combatants, the leaders, the warlords, etc., were any of them imprisoned after the conflict? Were there these types of sort of justice processes and that? And also on the other side, what was it like for communities, for people impacted from violence to consider forgiving those who perpetrated violence? What does integration actually look like? Has it happened in some way? So that's kind of a two-part question about what did justice or punishment look like for those responsible for the violence, and then how maybe have they or have they not been reintegrated? Do you want to start with that, Vaiba?
So our reintegration process in Liberia is so political. You know, after the GDRR process, it just happened during the intern government. The last peace talk brought in intern government led by Judy Bryant. So after that, Madam Salif took over. When Madam Salif took over, from the peace agreement, there was this thing about the TRC where people could tell their story. And then they set a commission called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where they went around the country collecting the different story, the different abuses, the different, just those things that happen that make people to die, to be displaced. And then they came up with recommendations. Well, up to this point, our former president being in jail, it wasn't by the Liberian people. It was by our neighbor, the Sierra Leonean, that had a case against him, but not the Liberian. But as we speak, there haven't been one single person being punished for what they did. Instead, they are into higher decision-making positions. So community become vulnerable. So what we experiencing, it is really a true reconciliation, or because the powerless people and just say, let's leave it to God. What will we do? But again, so all those children, they turn into fighters. Can you imagine taking less than 6 months to do disarmament, demobilization, rehabilitation, and reintegration? You sure with that help? Never. So we still got them. So reconciliation at the community level, it's just individual. What do I do? So not to just be angry with my neighbor, let me live the life until maybe one day it will come. But the anchor is there. The anchor is there. So we're waiting and see what will happen time to come. But these people can be in a position of decision making and pass law that will judge them. That can be possible. No matter how we talk with the peace activists, we'll continue talking, but there will be no punishment for them. Nothing absolutely will be done until the time comes. Reconciliation at the community level for the poor man is working because the poor man got no power to say anything. Yeah, that's what I would say on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I've been, I took this film to 32 countries personally, and then it traveled to many, many more. And so I've been in lots of post-conflict contests, and I live in a post-conflict context in the sense that there was a civil war in this country, and in the mid-19th century that there was no reconciliation process, there was no reintegration process. And we live with the scars of that still to this day. They characterize our political system. So except for South Africa, and there are critics of that process too, I have never been to a country that has come anywhere near a genuine reconciliation process. In Liberia's case, the structure of reconciliation was imported from the international community and imposed from the outside. And so right out of the gate, I don't think it had much chance because it hadn't been shaped by the Liberian people. And a level of impunity for war crimes that are so unspeakable still to this day. The level of impunity is disgusting. And it just, yeah, there will always be a toxic political culture, because when you come out of conflict, one of the things that we don't understand, if you've never been in it, is how intimate a violence war is, how intimate it is. It comes right through your living room and it slices your family in half. And I remember a fixer telling me that he'd been to a wedding over the weekend and he saw his own cousin wearing a suit that was his best and finest suit, because his cousin had gone into his house and taken it during the conflict. And I mean, like, that's an intimate violation. Families need to be transformed, and people are traumatized, every single person. And don't forget that Liberia, after all of the war trauma, had to go through the trauma of Ebola, which was re-traumatizing for every single person in that country. And if you think of a democracy as, a house made out of bricks, and each brick is a person, and every brick is traumatized, how can you build anything but a toxic political culture out of those raw materials? So I think that we've never really figured out reconciliation, either at the international community level or in my country or at the country level in Liberia. But I don't think any reconciliation process has a chance unless it addresses trauma in a serious and sustained way. And one of the other things is the international community is there with the money for disarmament. They're there with the money for the peace negotiations, but they are never there in the years afterwards in an extended and meaningful way. And if you want to prevent the future wars from happening, you've got to spend the money before they break out. Once the shooting starts, it's too late. You've already missed your opportunity. So, if you want to prevent a future conflict in Liberia, you would, convince the international community to show up with the resources that country needs to build a credible justice system and a credible police force that aren't corrupt, to hold the people who are in power responsible in a legal way for the crimes they committed, and to address trauma at a community level.
Thank you to both of you. I think that really, even just where Vaiba started, like, these people are still in positions of power. Yeah. It shows sort of how, to be honest, it reminds me of what I hear from Indigenous people in my own country in Canada, where there has been a process of truth and reconciliation about the genocide of Indigenous people. And a lot of the Indigenous people are saying, forget the reconciliation. You're still taking our land. You're still taking our kids. We can't start reconciling while this is still happening. Like, first, we have to end. The truth is good, but we need to end the violence before we can really do reconciliation. And I think you're right to point out that all over the world, there are huge challenges with these processes, and maybe we can learn bits and pieces from different places, but there's no perfect model, I don't think. But there's also a lot that we can look at that we know right off the bat, that's not okay, and that's not going to work. I've seen that people are quite interested in, as I mentioned, in both of your sort of backgrounds. The question, I'll start off with Abigail this time. I think especially hearing that this was your first film, what do you think in your background did prepare you to make this film? And it being your first film, how did you find or get the resources to do that?
Well, I come from a filmmaking family, as you might have noticed my last name, and that kind of gave me a little bit of a head start on it. I grew up around people who thought about how to tell stories on film. And it was a thing that got discussed at the dinner table, and it was a thing that kind of got hardwired into me. I went off to college, and then I went to graduate school and studied for a PhD in English literature, which, again, that's about storytelling. That is totally about narrative and storytelling and the power of that and what gets transformed and how it gets transformed. But on top of that, I wrote my dissertation about war novels. And honestly, at the time I was doing it, I wasn't really sure what drew me to that, except that I had an obsession with America's perverse attraction to violence as the way to solve every problem. And you could trace it through the literature from the day we started I remember there's a letter by George Washington during the French and Indian War 30 years before the Revolution. And he writes to his mother about his first day of conflict. He said, I heard the sound of a bullet whiz past my head, and I confess I found it beautiful. So like that feels like the most formative emotion for the American story that I can possibly imagine. And if you trace it through, so that's what I wrote about. I wrote about men, masculinity, and violence for my dissertation. And then, I had a lot of kids. I had 4 children. I was home with them. And that kind of didn't come up a lot, thankfully. But years later, as I was sort of starting my baby steps outside of, being home full time, I got this incredibly felicitous invitation to come to Liberia with a group of women. And it was there I heard the story. So I was 46 years old when I made my first film. I had been around the block a few times, as they say. But that was a good thing, because I had really thought about violence a lot. I had thought about masculinity a lot. And I had spent a lot of time working as a funder of community-based organizations in New York City. So I understood how women operate at the community level and what they can accomplish. So I started on third base, I guess, if you will, not only in terms of the subject matter, but obviously in terms of resources for the film. Like other people who are born in a normal life and in a normal family don't get to, just start off with the resources in place the way I did. But luckily, it was for a good reason that I dug deep and found the money for this.
And I think that most people's stories are that more circuitous route versus this straight and narrow, I'm going to be a filmmaker, I'm going to do this, and this towards this film, but rather it's storytelling and what gave you the ability to tell this story in this way. And that's interesting to hear. The question that Rhonda asked you, Vaiba, about your background was, what in your background do you think gave you the courage and ability to face a dangerous leader like Taylor and to lead other women?
Yeah. So my mother, when I was a child growing up, I grew up in a very remote community, no light, no water. And the men were so abusive on their women, on their wives. So my mother she managed to mobilize the women. So because we didn't have electricity, the only time you will see people happy in the night when the moonlight came out. So my mom went around mobilize these women. So during the 2 weeks of the moonlight, they could gather on the open field in the square to play, and they could dance by turn. So what started happening was, during that moonlight play, if they didn't see, because it was a small community, right? So if they didn't see any of those women, she became concerned. The next day she could go looking for that woman. And the woman would say, oh, my husband beat on me, this was hurting me, and my husband stopped me from coming to play. My mom did not go to school. She couldn't even speak English. But where she got the courage from, she walked to the care manager. She put few women behind her. I can still remember this woman walking in front of these women. They went to the care manager and said, she was speaking in one of the local dialects, and said to the care manager, we are not protected. I remember that word, that your staff continue to beat on us. Today we come to tell you, if any of these men beat any of these women behind me, the women will beat on our men back. And the response from the manager was, from today's date, I'm going to pass on the order. Any man that beats on his wife will be transferred to another camp. So that whole, that the women, the 2 weeks of the moonlight, they could play, the children could play. So, and now I started seeing this in my mom. All of the time, the women will come to her. Whenever they have problems, they will come. Even when they were pregnant, they didn't have money to go to hospital, they will come to. I grew up with a woman that was so involved into advocacy. So And I saw the result. And one thing she said to us over and over was, until your neighbor can sleep, you can't sleep.
Well, I'm just going to say, because I think Vaiba froze there.
If I'm not clear, somebody, yeah, you know, I using my phone, so anytime call, yeah. So I I was a feminist born me, and in my entire life, I saw her in this kind of struggle. So I grew up in this kind of struggle. I grew up in a poor home with many children. My mom struggled a lot. She couldn't have succeeded if there was no peace. And I stepped into my mother's shoes. In the documentary, you will see my house. My little sister was like dishing on, like sharing the food. I don't know that part in the documentary. It was my husband, my little sister trying to share the food. We were more than 15 in my house. So how can I survive with the 14 people when we're fighting war? How can I even run with these 14 people when all dear to my heart? I better do something. I better stand up for peace. I better keep the space secure for them, or else I'm going to get high more, because the emotional feeling attached to me, it was increasing per day when I saw each of them. So I grew up as a peace builder and a feminist.
Wow. Wow. Can I just jump in and say something? Because I'll go around talking about women and peace, because we ended up making Women, War, and Peace, which was about women's peace building movements in 5 different countries. And people would say, oh, you're just talking about women because you like women better, but Margaret Thatcher was into war, and there's no, you can't say that women just are peaceful all the time. And no, women are not peaceful all the time. And there are plenty of examples of women who fight. And the Janjaweed, when they would go into to slaughter people in Darfur, would get a song from the women of their community saying, you better come home with as many people killed as possible. I mean, there are plenty of examples of it. But here's what I believe. We've got 30,000 years of recorded history, right? And we know that there's one group of people that's much more likely to fight than the other group of people. And to deny that difference just because it doesn't exist at the absolute level is foolishness. We need to pay attention to that difference. And the fact is that around the world, even today, what women have to do and are asked to do in their communities and in their personal lives is feed and clothe and house and educate and care for the sick and care for the elderly. That is what women do. And everyone expects that women should do that. And the one material circumstance that they need to have in place in order to succeed in doing those things is peace. So if women have a natural relationship, if they're a natural constituency for peace and nonviolence, it is because it is in the nature of their lives to need peace to succeed at what they do. Women are threatened with violence, either explicitly or implicitly, every single day of their lives, because they live in communities where men are just larger and stronger and faster. And many of them live in communities where that advantage is pressed and used and put into service to cause women to have to submit. So it is also the natural fact of the female life in any society on earth that she has to find a way to resolve conflicts and get through problems in the least violent way possible, because she is disadvantaged by violence in almost every context. And so we are natural negotiators. I don't think it's an accident that our brains developed to be more verbal, because we must negotiate from the minute we become conscious until the minute we die. So when you doubt that there is a natural relationship between women and resisting war, think about the entirety of history, and then think about what women do. That's the answer to the question.
I think that brings up a lot of really interesting questions, but I also think that I have about 5 directions I could go. I think that it's interesting to, I'm reflecting on what Vaiba was sharing in terms of how she grew up in a context of peace building, of feminism, and the work that it sounds like your mother felt like she didn't have any choice to do. She just had to stand up for her community. She had to show up in solidarity with each other. That you had sort of a master class of community organizing, it sounds like, from the moment you were born, and those incredibly powerful skills of how do we come together as a powerful group? How do we stand in solidarity with our neighbors, with our sisters, with our families, with our friends, with everyone in our community? That is not easy work, but that's the work that is required to talk about building peace, right? And to talk about changing systems of power. And of course, many different types of people can learn those skills, but I think many women, like your mother, like yourself, do learn those skills from a place of necessity, and that is what can ultimately create these ripples that can change a country. I think that I think the one question I want to ask on the same sort of note about what does make change, looking at this broader scale, I want to touch back on something, Abby, that you said right at the beginning, which is that when stories of incredible grassroots resistance to violence, really anywhere in the world, when those do reach a broad audience, like you said, it's often depicted as the work of this one larger than life leader, right? This one hero. Or it's depicted as this flashpoint where we don't know why, but all of a sudden, thousands of people turned out on the streets, thousands of people rose up. I think this film, one of the most incredible contributions it makes, is that it shows what was behind those powerful moments where thousands of women wearing white t-shirts were suddenly standing up to dictators and warlords. It didn't happen magically, right? Your film shows it was the hard, banal, grinding work of that Vaiba was describing, of reaching out, of getting together with people in the same situation as you, organizing all the day-by-day logistics, the bus fare, the food, who's taking care of the kids, where the t-shirts coming from, building the connections, growing bit by bit, etc. So that work, I mean, it's very hard to do. It's very hard to motivate people to do. And when you're doing it, you have no clue what it's leading towards, right? In retrospect, we can say you did all that hard work and look, it sparked this peace movement that brought down the government. You don't know any of that when you're doing it. So I guess I'm wondering what lessons we think can be learned from this experience in Liberia that are going to apply to other efforts to build nonviolent movements elsewhere in the world. In my job, I talk every day with people around the world who want to create these movements, but they don't know where it's going to go. They don't know how to do it. Yours is such a powerful example, and I'd love to hear from both of you what you can share with people around the world about that process.
Vaiba, you want to go first?
Let me go first and I'll give it to you, Abby. So one of the things we need to know in peace building is we all got part to play in it. I know sometimes we go to school, it's about the war is about education, especially for you from the West. But when it comes to peace building, it should be from the bottom up. The reason is the people from the bottom. That's why I like the community. They are the one with the story. They are the one with the idea because they know the history of the conflict. They are the one that can share the information. They are the one from the beginning, they were there doing the planning stage, the community people. Are the one we use. So if we're doing peace building and say, maybe the community people, because they didn't go to school, they didn't have masters in conflict resolution and peace building, So peace building is not theory, it's practical, it's action, it's driven, it's action driven. It's that people see you in the act and say, yes, this is what we're going for. So for me, the lesson learned from me, my takeaway from the work we did, peace building or conflict resolution is not about PhD. PhD got part to play in it, yes, but it's about that common idea. Where the conflict started, go back there. You will find that peace. So that's what I wanted to say.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. I wanted to show more of the how in the film, because there were a bunch of different things that we heard from the women about sort of the what was happening in the background. And one of the things Lema told me was that, they were definitely worried that they could be easily divided, right, Vaiba? That it would have been really easy to divide you against each other. Because there were class differences, there were religious differences, there were differences of urban versus rural. And what Lema told me was they and you'll have to describe this to me if you were there, left the city for a few days, and the Muslim women got to say anything they wanted about the Christian women, and then the Christian women got to say anything they wanted about the Muslim women, and then they yelled at each other for a while and worked out their differences. So what you have there is, first of all, strategic brilliance, right, in anticipating this weakness of how easily people get to be divided, and then figuring out how to address that in advance of the divisions so that they would go forward. I mean, that was strategically so freaking brilliant. And that took people in leadership who were thinking 3 steps or 3 turns ahead of themselves. So, there is the importance of leadership can't be overstated. It's really important. But again, this was a group of people in leadership together working these strategies out. It wasn't just one person sitting alone in her room saying, this is how we're going to handle this. Martin Luther King is kind of the textbook example of a leader of, a big social movement that accomplished enormous change. And he's always credited alone. And I think more in the last 10 to 15 years, we've been able to see more other people getting credit. And he would have gladly shared credit. It was one reason people wanted to follow him, was he was the sort of person who didn't hog credit. It was the journalists and the people in power who tended to overcredit him. But in Montgomery, which was his first big social action, it was the women who made the decision. It was his first assignment to a church. He was 28 years old. And can you imagine? He was 28 years old. And the women of the church said, we're going to have a bus boycott. And Martin Luther King said, no, it's not a good idea. Don't do a bus boycott. But the women went ahead and did it without him. And it was a bunch of mothers and grandmothers who said, this is how we're going to do it, and this is how it's going to go. And of course, it was a wildly successful action. He saw the strategic value of it and got on board. But every step of the way, if he were alive today, he would tell you, was dictated by those women. The strategy of it was dictated by those women. And he learned, he was schooled by those women. And he brought everything he learned from that bus boycott forward. And he combined that knowledge that came from the community with a substantial amount of personal charisma, an incredibly strategic mind, a huge amount of emotional intelligence, which he needed to be able to manage a fractious community that had different agendas and greater and lesser inclinations to violence and other things. And then the other value that he shared with all the leaders of that movement was courage. And I watched the film Selma with Lema. We were sitting side by side, and there's a scene where the camera is kind of pushing in through the side car window on Martin Luther King's face close up, and in the background, in the passenger seat, you have John Lewis, and John Lewis is talking about what's going to happen the next day and whether people were going to get beaten and so forth. And all you have is John Lewis talking, and then in the foreground, you've got Martin Luther King's face in a brilliant performance. I don't remember the name of the actor, but nevertheless, it's brilliant because you go on a whole emotional journey with his face in that scene. And I was sitting next to Lema, and she just grabbed my hand and squeezed it really tight, because she'd been there. She'd been there with the fact that they were going into those protests every day, and Vaiba can confirm this, without a certainty that everything would be fine, that there was no certainty that people wouldn't be hurt. There was no certainty that there would be success. There was no certainty of any of it. And it's one thing to be courageous for your own well-being, and it's another thing entirely to be courageous as a leader, knowing the risk you're asking people to put themselves into. That was incredibly profound. I'd never really thought about it before, but it's why Shakespeare says, uneasy is the head that lies the head that wears the crown. It's very difficult in mass movements to ask masses of people, unnamed anonymous people, to put themselves at substantial physical and emotional risk. And I've spent a substantial amount of time in Selma in the last few years, meeting and working with the women, primarily women, who were there for that march on those days. And yeah, they played an incredibly critical role, and yet have never really, nobody knows their name. And they're fine with that because they succeeded. So mass movements are very difficult, but honestly, they're the only ones that succeed.
I think that both of you shared a whole bunch of really insightful things there that I won't try and summarize, but one thing that stood out from both of what you're saying is regardless of whether the media or whoever else is going to depict it as there was one person who made the decisions, that's never the case, and it shouldn't ever be the case. You talked about it in terms of peace building from below, and the people and who are maybe the secret people who are actually influencing the decisions, but that to be successful, the decisions need to be made by not just one type of person, not just one person, not just one small group of all the same type of people, but by the people who, have different ideas of what can happen.
The Philippines have an expression that if you want to make a rice cake, you need heat from the top and heat from the bottom. And I think that's how social movements succeed.
I think we have time for just one question. I think, first of all, it's been so wonderful speaking with both of you. I'm so just deeply taken with both of your work and your presence and your answers. And you're both just clearly so committed to peace building in the broadest sense and intersectional struggles against violence. I'd love to just give each of you a chance to tell us a bit more about a project that you're working on now. And I noticed, for example, with Abigail, I was very curious about your work with Peace is Loud, which I know was a foundation that was inspired by this movie. It hasn't come up really yet in this conversation. I'd love to hear a bit about that. And Vaiba, I'd love to hear more about, what's one thing you're working on now that you think it would be interesting to share with all of us.
Well, Bob, I'm going to start so you can close us out, because I'd rather you be the closer. I started something called Peace is Loud in the years after Pray the Devil Back to Hell came out. It was inspired by something that Sugars said, which was peace is not an event, peace is a process. And it set me on a journey of thinking about what is peace exactly. It's not a quiet retreat to the corner. It's in the center of everything, and it's a verb, and it's demanding, and it's hard work, and it's frightening. So peace isn't quiet, peace is loud. And so we started Peace is Loud so that we could facilitate community screenings just like this one, and other kinds of strategies to elevate the voices of peace builders around the world, primarily women peace builders. And so we have a speakers bureau that has, I think we've got up to over 20 speakers now who we negotiate their compensation. It's really important to me that women get compensated for the work that they do. And very often, even the most well-intended groups will try to nickel and dime women who they're bringing in to speak. So we represent some women peace builders, and we get them booked in front of corporations and schools and all kinds of different things like that. We sponsor film screenings. We do campaigns, impact campaigns for documentary films as they come out. I just watched one that's coming out this year that's called Fire Through Dry Grass, and it was made by the men and women who were living inside of a nursing care, long-term care facility. They started shooting the day COVID lockdown began. And it is about how COVID played out in their nursing home, and it's made by the people in the nursing home about their experience of trying to get some safety for themselves. It is the quintessential film of community action in the real context of the community itself. So we've been doing that for years now. I think we started Pieces Loud in 2008, and it's going gangbusters. But you know, the other thing is that, like, before I started my last film, which is called The American Dream and Other Fairy Tales, which is about the Walt Disney Company and about my memories as a child growing up, and what kind of company it was in those days, and how they related in particular to their employees, and what kind of company it is today, and what changed between then and now to create the circumstances under which it seems to be okay with everybody that people can work full-time for a very profitable company and still not be able to put food on their table. Why is it like this? But that film emerged from what at the time I was calling the Peace Project. And the Peace Project was a very ambitious idea I had to construct a multimedia, multi-million-dollar series of projects around elevating the notion of peace, particularly in the American imagination, though it has to happen around the world. But wow, it really needs to happen in America, especially. And we were going to do a documentary series and a reality show and an IMAX film for, you know, natural history museums and series of shorts. And we had all sorts of ideas, very, very ambitious. But I got sucked into the work around the Disney company. That film is called The American Dream and Other Fairy Tales. And that just ended up sucking up all my time. And then COVID came along. So I'm back to thinking about the Peace Project again. It's sort of evolved in my imagination. But when you guys were talking earlier, I just wanted to say, I need you to talk to me about this, because if you're working to unsettle some of those myths, that's exactly what I want to do in media. So we should be talking about working together, because I really, really want to do that. So I'm going to be starting another series of media projects, maybe a documentary film, maybe not. I'm not sure in this moment it's necessarily the best way to convey information. It was in 2008. I'm not sure it is now. But it will be like probably a series of short content for TikTok and things like that. But I'm back to centering peace. I thought of the work around income inequality as a way of addressing peace, because you can't have real peace in a country where, you know, people's faiths are so divided, and they don't see each other as participating in the same economic world. They see themselves as materially different. So it was a way of addressing peace, but now I want to get more directly back into peace and peace building.
That's so great to hear. And thank you to my colleague Greta, who I see has plunked a link in the chat to just the intro page for World Beyond War's work on debunking the myths of war, which have just become so much a part of, at least in North America, sort of basic common sense that unpacking them is really challenging so much of what people assume, but then it's so transformative.
Can I tell you my one teeny tiny factoid that I just love that people are blown away by? George Washington, the founding president of the United States, envisioned, you know, he started the Department of War. That was it's like, again, as natural as the Department of Energy or whatever else. He wanted there to be a Department of Peace that was equal in size and stature to the Department of War, but he was voted down. So I think that's really interesting. Those are the kinds of surprising things that I want people to know.
Absolutely. Vaiba, please do tell us something about your work now and anything else that you'd like to share as we wrap up this panel.
So I continue my work at the community level again, but this time I'm working for microfinance institution, because as Abby rightly put it, peace building is a process. So if I see many of the women that started the peace movement with us, when they spend their time, they left everything they were doing and came behind us to support us in the movement. Today, they are all so sick. In the government, they recognize us as the Women in Peace building, but they haven't come to say, what will they do for us in terms of welfare? Why if one of those women got sick, what will happen? So the few of us among them that got job, it became burden for us. For Lema, is today activities. Whenever she comes to Monrovia, it's like trouble for her. Everyone is like taking letter of request, begging her. They don't want to do it, but they are forced to do it. They see her as their leader and they need it. So going into macro credit, where we give women small money to do business, but this time around, it's not a grant. It should be a loan. Because maybe the grant, they will take it for free money, and maybe they will not want to be like, oh, I have to pay back. I have to do this. I have to do that. So I'm into microcredit, but just after giving the money, we'll go into training, extra training. Even though there are women that are already trained to peace building, but we know you have to have food on your table. You have to be able to pay your child's school fees. So, and one of the things they can started to do is their children, because what's happening, teenage pregnancy is on the increase, and they are children from low-income families. So what I do is, these little guys from the low-income families, what I do is put them into a mentoring program and then sit with their parents and do payment plan with the school, and I talk with the school and say, look, sometimes there are 3 from one family. The mother is not working, the father is not working. It's just small market table. So sit with the school, make arrangement with the school and say, please allow this parent to pay per month every little amount before the school year comes to and close. They are able to pay their children school fees. So guess what happening to them? Because they are kept in school, they are not getting pregnant. Teenage pregnancy is reduced. Because school fees are paid on time through our pre-financing, the financial we pay and they pay back. Also, teachers are on time. Teachers are not going all of the classroom. And then what happened in quality education, more interest into going to school, school number increase. So a lot of the work I continue to do at a community level. So, and not forgetting my peace building, who continue to train community women to peace building. So let's continue the work. Again, Abi, thank you, but you still need to come back to Liberia. The Liberian women want to see you.
I know, I really want to come.
We need to come back and see where we are in terms of the peace building. Yes, we know reconciliation is a challenge, but what we've done at the community level to get the poor women moving on, the poor people moving on, that they don't have time for these people. We need to come back to see what really working and how we can continue this work. You put us on the map, we need to continue doing the work. Yeah.
I miss you, Vaiba, so much. I was so happy to be on this call with you. I love you so much.
Thank you, Abby. Me too. Thank you. You make us to be that pricing. And I don't know what word to use, but pray that the whole battle help have put me in a better position. It's not about the money, it's about that platform that make your dream fulfill, make you to feel human. My purpose on earth, pray that the whole battle help you help me to achieve my purpose, to know that I was so meaningful to this work. And thank you to the organizer. Thank you for inviting me. Anytime, let's move this one word, in peace. Thank you. Peace building is a process.
Thank you so much to both of you. This has been just incredibly inspiring. Thank you to Rachel for moderating. I absolutely loved the film, and this discussion was so fulfilling today. So thank you for joining us, and thank you to the participants for tuning in live. We've had over 200 registrants for the film festival. Obviously, many of them couldn't join us live because we have an audience that's all in different time zones. So we are recording this, and we will send out the recording afterwards. The film is also still available until the end of the day today. So if anyone hasn't seen it, you can still log on to that link and watch it. And a reminder to everyone that our final day of the Film Fest is coming up 1 week from today, Saturday, March 25th at the same time, 3 p.m. Eastern time. And we'll be discussing the film Beyond the Divide, which is kind of interesting. We've looked sort of outward at civil war and conflict and these different examples, and then Beyond the Divide looks inward at sort of interpersonal struggles. It's a story of a small town art crime in Montana, United States, that divided the community, and especially the divide between peace activists and military veterans. And it talks through that reconciliation process that they went through. So it's really interesting, and we hope everyone will join us next week. Thank you again to both of you, Abby and Vaiba. And yeah, have a good rest of your evening, day, wherever you're located. Bye-bye.